Tonight, as we celebrate, we don't just celebrate me as an individual. We celebrate this movement, a movement designed to push back against a system that's literally killing us. It's killing us mentally, psychologically, and spiritually.
On June 23rd, in New York State's Democratic primary election, a former middle school principal named Jamaal Bowman claimed victory in his insurgent campaign for Congress. The absentee ballots are still being counted, but Bowman has a substantial lead over the incumbent, Eliot Engel, a 16-term congressman and chair of the powerful House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Let me tell you something right now. Eliot Engel, and I'll say his name once, used to say that he was a thorn in the side of Donald Trump. But you know what Donald Trump is more afraid of than anything else? A black man with power. That is what Donald Trump is afraid of.
New York's 16th Congressional District is majority Black and Hispanic. It includes the Bronx, but also stretches north into some very wealthy white suburbs. In the past, Engel, who is white and 73 years old, has pretty much cruised to re-election. But lately, he's taken some heat for riding out the coronavirus pandemic at his home in Maryland, while his district was hard hit. And then, at a news conference on racism and police brutality, Engel was heard on a hot mic appearing to say he wanted to speak only because he was facing a primary challenge. A challenge from Jamaal Bowman. Bowman is Black, in his 40s, and ran on a platform of Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, canceling student debt, and other issues of racial and economic justice. I'm Tremaine Lee. This is Into America. Today, we're going into the life and politics of Jamaal Bowman, a Black progressive Democrat, a newcomer who is part of a progressive movement taking on the establishment. He's gotten the backing of progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, and the Working Families Party, which is now teaming up with the Movement for Black Lives to form a political action committee. I wanted to know how this former educator came to politics and why he decided to take on one of the most powerful Democrats in Congress. Jamaal Bowman, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, brother. Thank you for having me.
You came out of nowhere for a lot of people and shook up the political establishment. But give us a sense of where you came from. How did you arrive here?
Yeah, so for the last 20 years, I've worked in public education. I started teaching in the South Bronx in 1999 in a K-4 school with 1,500 kids. Most of them recently arrived to the country. Did that for about 5 or 6 years before becoming a dean of students at the High School for Arts and Technology. And part of my job there was to monitor metal detectors as Black and brown kids walked in. So I often say I felt more like a corrections officer than an educator. At that point, I decided to organize parents, teachers, and students and write a proposal for a new district public school that we wanted to open in the North Bronx. We wrote the proposal in 2008. We submitted it in 2009. And in September 2009, Cornerstone Academy for Social Action Middle School was born. So for the last 10 and a half years, I've served as a middle school principal, in addition to being an education organizer. So yeah, I didn't quite come from nowhere, but I know for some that may be the case, yeah.
So when you think back to your formative years, young Jamaal Bowman, and think about where you are now, was there a moment, was there a feeling, was there something going on in your life that you connect now and say, this is why I do this?
I mean, my mom, first and foremost, my mother told me I could be anything I wanted to be, and I believed her. Like, I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, man. I was 7 years old. We were sitting in the dining room. I don't remember what we were doing, but my mother told me that, and I believed her. She was a single mom. I had 3 sisters, and she gave us 3 things. She gave us love, a stable home, and she gave us self-confidence. And that's the springboard to everything I've done in my life. And on the other side, I would say that I got lucky. I was a street kid. I used to always be out in the street, playing with my friends, getting into fights, getting into trouble at school, all those things. And there are many times where I could have been killed. Like I was involved. I was around shootouts, man, and thank God, I was able to make it through.
Was there a moment when you said, you know what, I got to get into politics, I got to get in the race, I have to do something more than what I'm doing? Was there an actual moment?
Yeah, Nelson Mandela has a quote. He says, education is the most powerful tool that can be used to change the world. So for 20 years, I tried to do that in education. Like I tried to make my classroom like a revolutionary classroom, teaching our kids about history and culture and their unlimited potential and power. But I just felt like I kept banging my head against a system that was immovable, like it wasn't a system that was responsive to the needs of our kids. And for me, the tipping point occurred in 2017, 2018, when 34 children died within the K 12 school system in the Bronx, and 17 died via suicide. And as educators and as people of color, we know the connection between trauma, poverty, and bad policy that comes from Washington. And right here in this district in Co-op City, a young girl who was bullied in school, who came from a foster care system, went to the top of a building right after school and jumped off the building and committed suicide. And right here in New Rochelle, two girls got into a fight or got into an argument outside New Rochelle High School during a lunch break. One pulls out a knife, stabs the other, and murders her. And I never saw or heard our elected officials really centering trauma, centering poverty, and centering the needs of our most vulnerable in their political discourse or in the policies that they fought for. So it was that led me to begin thinking about it. And when we started exploring and talking about Congressman Engel, the number one word we continued to hear was absent. And for me, that was just unacceptable. And that's when we decided to get into the race.
I want to zero in on that idea of trauma. What is a political response to trauma? What does that actually look like?
It centers on wellness and well-being, and it centers on public health in a holistic way. So when we talk about defunding the police, it's not just about taking resources away from a police department that brutalizes us. So we need to just rethink policing and public health overall. And as we deal with ancestral trauma and generational trauma, there needs to be a period of truth and reconciliation as a country to acknowledge the harms of slavery and institutional racism and how it literally lives in the bones and the DNA of everyone in this country. But in terms of policy, it's about focusing on healing the wounds of history that has kept us out of economic opportunity. So policy that provides opportunities to buy homes at well below market rate so that we could begin to build wealth through home ownership. Policies that invest in minority and women-owned businesses that allows us to build wealth from the perspective of entrepreneurship. Policies that provide universal health care. Policies focused on early childhood. And early childhood is critical because early childhood allows us to create nurturing environments in our communities that have most been neglected, where ancestral trauma is passed down. Education, fully funding our public schools in alignment with the needs of children, not in alignment with property taxes. So there are many policies, reparations being the umbrella, but underneath reparations, we have to not just put money in the pockets of people, but make sure we pass policies in the areas where institutional racism still exists.
So Jamaal, the 16th Congressional District begins in the Bronx and goes north, right, to some of the suburban cities. Give us a sense of place and what your district actually encompasses, and also the different constituency groups that make up that geography.
If we were a nation, we would have the eighth worst economic inequality in the world. It's economically unequal and is racially unequal, right? So when you're looking at the Black and brown people in the district are concentrated in the North Bronx, Northeast Bronx mostly, as well as Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and parts of New Rochelle. And the whiter, quote unquote, parts of the district are everywhere else north on the northern Westchester side of the district. But after the murder and lynching of George Floyd, as we saw Black Lives Matter rallies across the country, we saw Black Lives Matter rallies here in this district in some of the whitest, wealthiest areas of the district, where we had 2,000 people turn out. People are demanding change and they're tired of the institutional racism that persists. And it's younger people. And it's not just people who are white and wealthy, it's younger people driving the ship. And this is the moment for us to be very urgent and very aggressive in taking advantage of all of that.
When you think about your constituents, and on one side you have the Bronx and the other side you have wealthy Westchester County, how do you address the needs of all these different constituency groups?
Issues like environmental justice cross race and class. Issues like universal health care cross race and class. The wealthy in this district and across the country believe in a federal minimum wage and believe that everyone should have a right to a job and a right to housing, right? So even though those issues may not impact those people directly, they still believe that others should have those opportunities.
When we come back, Jamaal Bowman takes us through a thrilling election night, and we'll talk about what he wants to accomplish in D.C. We'll be right back. We're back with Jamaal Bowman. Let's talk about your primary against Eliot Engel. First of all, man, what gave you the audacity to challenge a 30-plus year incumbent? The nerve. What gave you that sense of, you know what, there's a chance?
My wife would say that I'm crazy. That might be that might be part of it, man. Crazy enough to believe that something like that was possible. I've been so inspired and empowered by my students over the years and what they've been capable of and what they've shown in the classroom and beyond. And it was a combination of that inspiration, a combination of a gap between what I saw missing from our communities and what elected officials were talking about. And then literally looking at the numbers and seeing like, well, wait a minute, there are 300,000 registered Democrats in this district. Only 30,000 voted in the last primary. And my thinking was, wow, this person is winning a congressional seat year after year with only 22,000 votes and making decisions, trillion-dollar decisions that impact the lives of millions of people, right? He supported the 1994 crime bill, which we are still trying to repeal and replace. He supports policies that favor Wall Street over Main Street. He voted for the Iraq war and against the Iran deal and takes money from weapons manufacturers and corporations. So this is not a person that we need in Congress to help our communities of color and historically disenfranchised communities. So for me, looking at those numbers and looking at, everything he has represented, it was like, okay, I could probably knock on 30,000 doors myself if I start a year in advance. But luckily for me, I was nominated to the Justice Democrats and they endorsed us from the very beginning. And that helped us to organize a progressive grassroots movement throughout the district. So shout out to the Justice Democrats, shout out to the Working Families Party. I could be here on and on because we were endorsed by 60 grassroots organizations. So it wasn't just me.
But how much weight and value did the endorsements of like AOC, Bernie Sanders, the Squad, how helpful was that in terms of just elevating your stature so quickly and your profile so quickly?
Man, it was a tremendous aspect of the crescendo that we hit as a campaign. I mean, we were grinding and doing very, very well. And then Congressman Engel had the hot mic moment.
Yep.
So that day, our campaign raised $110,000. On average, in a day, we raised about $2,000, right? The next day, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez endorsed us. We raised another $98,000 that day. And our average from that day to the end of the campaign with the Bernie Sanders endorsement, the Elizabeth Warren endorsement, helped us to bring the campaign home in the end.
So take us to June 23rd. Going into that night, I'm sure you thought you had a chance, but did you think you would win? And was there a moment where you said, I think we got this?
Listen, we didn't allow ourselves to believe that we got it at any moment throughout the campaign. But on election day, as we did our bus tour, we went to places in the district where I didn't even canvass. And I'm embarrassed to say that. You can't get everywhere. And in one place, there was this long line for people to vote. And I just walked by just to say hello and introduce myself. And the way people turned toward me and took out their phones and started recording, and just how they were listening, I was like, hold up. Okay, like this is really good. Like if we're getting this kind of reception in places we didn't even canvass. And then that day, everywhere we went, it was this energy and this excitement of people who were either going to vote for us or had already voted for us. my campaign manager showed me the early voting coming in. And again, like, I still didn't want to allow myself to believe the early numbers, but we were destroying him in the Bronx. It was the Bronx numbers. And then when the Westchester numbers started coming in, it was like we were winning areas like Hartsdale. I'm like, okay, if we're winning in Hartsdale, this might be big, you know? And now, and they're still counting absentee ballots, but the early results are consistent with what we saw at the polls.
When you think about that excitement from corners of the district that, felt forgotten for a long time, and here they are calling your name, unseating a 30-plus year incumbent, and you think about the other progressive candidates who are winning elections across the country, what do you think your race says about the shifting dynamics that we're seeing from, an older guard to something new?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to 2016, and Senator Bernie Sanders calling out economic injustice in all its forms. That galvanized a new group of politically engaged people in the overall democratic process. And then that spawned the creation of the Justice Democrats, which led to support of and then the elections of the Squad in 2018. So we're just a part of that movement and continuing that wave. If it weren't for them, particularly the Squad, I mean, we're talking about 4 women of color going up against the white supremacist patriarchy of our country from inside the system, speaking truth to power, calling it out and destroying it in all its forms. So we're following the footsteps of those 4 amazing women of color and following the stand on the shoulders of our ancestors in doing this work. So it means, it feels like America is ready and the world is ready for this transformative change that we're a part of. But as we know, we got to continue to do the work. Like I personally, I didn't run for office just to get in the office. If I get in the office and I don't do anything, then I might as well have stayed my behind home and not tried to be a part of this. But now that I'm in office, as I said during my speech on election night, it's time to cause some trouble. It's time to speak truth to power and bring attention to the issues that matter most. And I look forward to doing that.
Now, you brought up the Squad, which has inspired a lot of people across the country. But again, they have taken some shots even from within inside the Democratic machine. If and when you get to Washington with this grassroots support, with this super progressive kind of agenda, how does that translate into the big, political process and the big D Democrats? And how do you actually navigate those spaces coming on the winds of that very aggressive, progressive push?
To quote 50 Cent, got a Purple Heart for war and I ain't never left the city. We're pretty strong. We're battle tested. We understand that there will be pushback, but we also know there are many in the House and many in the Senate, and most importantly, voters throughout the country who agree with the policies that we are pushing forth. Poll after poll after poll shows support for Medicare for all. Poll after poll shows support for a Green New Deal. And particularly now, we're in the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. And what happened during the Great Depression? FDR implemented a New Deal and the Workers' Progress Administration and a federal jobs guarantee, creating millions of union jobs. That's exactly what we need right now. So there are many people who will continue to push back, but we have the majority of the people in this country behind us and on our side.
As an education expert and with your history, I wonder what you think about the children of our communities who have been out of school, who have been impacted by all of this in ways that we won't see for years, and the trauma. How do we get them back into classrooms, and how do we get them whole from everything that's been chipped away?
We need the full resources of the federal government to be brought to bear to make sure our children can return to school safely and in environments where we can accelerate their learning. Number one, we need to hire more teachers because in order to lower class size, we need more teachers to teach smaller groups of students. Number two, we need to be innovative and creative in the spaces that we are using as classrooms and learning spaces. So right now here in New York City, we have theaters and convention centers and corporate offices that aren't being used because of the pandemic. Those need to be retrofitted and created as learning spaces so we could give kids as much face time with an adult teaching them as possible. The online learning platforms are inadequate. They don't meet the needs of the majority of our kids, particularly children with special needs. So when I say resources from the federal government, I mean money directly to school districts so that they can retrofit spaces to be in alignment with CDC recommendations, which is increased ventilation, cleaning, mask, gloves, and everything that's needed there. That's the only way parents and grandparents and others are going to feel safe sending their children to school.
Obviously, these are really tough times. What does Jamaal Bowman do to stay hopeful, to stay sane, to stay grounded? What's your regimen? How do you do it, if you're doing it?
Another great question, man. I am lucky and blessed to have an amazing partner and my wife, Melissa Oppenheimer Bowman. We've been married for several years, I think 5. Don't tell her that
You about to get in trouble, man.
Right? I'm getting in trouble.
You about to get in trouble.
But we've been together for several years. We've been married for several years. We have 2 children. We have a home. We're very lucky to just have this stable environment here. Number 2, I try to do the best I can to eat right and exercise on a consistent basis, man. I mean, it sounds small, but in terms of remaining balanced and in terms of my own sort of mental health and energy, eating right and exercising on a consistent basis and really paying attention to diet and those particular habits and doing everything I can in terms of prayer and meditation and just staying centered spiritually. To just help deal with everything that's happening in the world and transition to this new responsibility I have, as a member of Congress.
I have one last pretty serious question, man. When you get to Washington, do you become part of the squad, like an honorary member? Do you get to hang out? Do you get a pin, a lapel pin or something, man?
Listen, I'm hoping for a pin, a T-shirt, a hat, and I'm hoping to be not an honorary member, but an actual member of the squad. So I'm gonna start as soon as they count the final vote. I'm gonna start lobbying to be a part of the squad as soon as they're done.
Jamaal Bowman, thank you, good brother, for your time. Really appreciate it. This was fantastic, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
That was Jamaal Bowman, the Democrat running to serve the 16th Congressional District of New York. And a separate news update before we go. Last week, we reported on the Justice Department's plan to resume federal executions for the first time in 17 years. The first of 4 scheduled executions was supposed to be today in Indiana. But with just hours to spare, a judge blocked all federal executions, for now, saying the method of lethal injection may be unconstitutionally cruel and unusual punishment. The Justice Department is appealing the decision. Into America is produced by Isabel Angel, Allison Bailey, Aaron Dalton, Max Jacobs, Barbara Rabb, Claire Ty, Aisha Turner, and Preeti Varathan. Original music by Hannes Brown. Our executive producer is Ellen Frankman. Steve Lichtai is executive producer of audio. I'm Tremaine Lee. We'll be back on Wednesday.